당은서 대화침비기 당은 기부 중요해 남기림바 투모와 남기림바 로장수 기부 딩다 투모와 남기림바 로장수 아니 기부 침비 남기림바 로장수로서 당은서 람림기 셰하디 달라림바 마선나 숨여가시 당은서 다다 기부 중요해 남기림바 투모와 남기림바 로장수 되시에 사제 난 기부 딩다 투모와 남기림바 로장수 되시에 사제 당도 다대셔야지 맞아 기부 침비게 남기는 걸로 장수 안에 뒤고 쉬에 아쉬고 와다.
Good evening. We've been looking at this Lam Rim Text for some time now, and we've looked at all the practices that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity, and thereafter we've already looked at all the trainings that are shared with practitioners of intermediate capacity. And now we are well within the trainings that are unique to practitioners of supreme capacity. We are within the context now of the Mahayana Dharma.
기부 침비 남기린 발로 장수 냠는 지수 세이도 다 장수 셈바는게 남냠는 제타린 바로 송거와 대단다 기부 침비기 남기린 바 냠는 간에 제베이네야 다 기부 중우다 딩다 침별 남기린 발로 장수 라용도 체중 침보다 중우다 딩다 침보세디 군노라라리고 군노게 충충으로 비이나 충충 안에 제 개와 치마 사담이 원노 잠지 돈돈이르지 안에 람 림바 냠슬림페 계셔주바이나 개와 충우다 개와 충우에 남기린 바세아시로와 다 코와레 탈바잠 돈돈이르지 군노 디토네 안에 냠는 제바이나 다 기부 딩게 남기린 바로 장수시거와 가라스네 다디 기부 충우에 남기린 바 삼록 딜레드스 개체화지로와 다 산지고바 토바 마삼바인자 딜레게 충화지 다 개체 삼록 개치쇼데 가라스 군노 개치쇼데 가라스 셈제 탐지기 된다 산요고바 토바 지긴세 비게다 셈 군노 장수 셈데 다디 군노데다 군노 개침보 슈차와 디니인자 나 충호단 링다 침보세디 다고 로 만용당 안에 지게 수부치중 개화면 바지 다 삼로 군로디 삼로 개치중 원가 송아래 지루와
What is it that differentiates these different kinds of practitioners? What is it that it leads to one group being called those of smallest capacity, and another group being those of intermediate or middling capacity, and another group being called those of greatest or supreme capacity? What differentiates these three types of practitioners is their motivation and the goal that motivation aspires to achieve. Another way to express it is what differentiates these three types of practitioners is the vastness and profundity of their motivation that is aspiring to achieve a particular goal. A practitioner of smallest capacity or initial capacity, they are referred to as having the smallest capacity because of the vastness and profundity of their motivation is small, and it is so because of the goal they're striving for. It is just a good rebirth in one's next life. And similarly, a practitioner who is striving for liberation, whilst this is a far vaster a goal and more profound goal to achieve, and therefore the motivating intention is far vaster and more profound when compared to a practitioner of smallest capacity. This practitioner, though, still is one only of middling capacity in the sense that whilst their goal is so much greater than that of the practitioner of small capacity, still their motivation for this goal is middling in its terms of its vastness and profundity in comparison to the bodhisattva, the practitioner who's striving for Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. They are striving for the supreme goal, the greatest goal, and they are striving to achieve it through the cultivation of the supreme, the greatest motivation, the most profound motivation, the vastest of motivations. So therefore, what differentiates the three types of practitioners is the vastness and profundity of their motivation, which is desiring the attainment of a particular goal. So this is how we differentiate practitioners of small, middling, and greatest capacity.
Ajivu chimbe lam yirimba sede da semja tham jige do sanjo ko ba thopor sho sembege da janju sem da di sem dis miyu de semja tham jige do ndala sam tawen sa da semjen se di semjen thaye ba ya chemo shu cha de ro ba jisa semja tham jige do ndala sanjo ko ba thopor sho sibi kunlo di janju sem de da sem de be ma se kunlo de ya chemo shu cha de ro ba deni ge kune lang je da ge yue nyamne ge chur nyamne chigen dige la gi wo chimpo si ge ro da kunlo ja chimpo yue de gen de ka sa de le gi wo chimpo so a deni ge nyamne je da gi wo chimpe lam lam ni ro nyamne je da se yun da de ja ya la da gi wo chimpe lam ni rin ba se de nyamne je ba la nga zu ge kunlo sem je tam ji ge sang yo ko ba to bo sho sem bi ge da jan ju sem de nga zu ge la ge ho wo ro da deni ge jan ju sem yu kun ne lang je ge chu ka ro tu bai ne da gi wo chimpe lam ni rin ba la lo chang wa se ko ro wa
Whilst the goals of practitioners of small and middling capacity are crucial, and one needs to strive to achieve this, it's a practitioner of greatest capacity who is striving to achieve those same goals, but in order to achieve the greatest of all goals, that of Buddhahood for the sake of others. It is that practitioner that is called supreme or greatest in terms of their capacity, because of the profundity and vastness of their motivating intention. So they have as an object all sentient beings. The object that they are striving to benefit is all sentient beings across all realms of existence, without exception. So here we can see the vastness of the beings that they are striving to help. And to achieve this goal of being able to be of benefit to them, and not just mere benefit, but greatest benefit, they strive to become the greatest of beings, a Buddha. And in order to achieve this, they engage in the cultivation of all the paths of a bodhisattva, all the wide variety of trainings that a bodhisattva needs to engage in order to transform themselves into a perfected being, a Buddha.
Adine zada semja tam jigi tuna sanyo ko ban topor sho chibe chenju semdi nga zo da gyula nga zo ge hoya di ge ho wore chisa da semja tam jigi tuna sanyo ko ban topor sho chibe chenju semdi gyula ge le ya ane tablam ro chi kar che wore se de di gyula ge tabshi nyamlen che da de la ane gyunde me nga dun yu ko ne ane nyamlen che da chi ane ka so wore dene 다시 냠지요 권에 냠는 제제 제주심기 하시 이른바시 이순고로와
This is the motivation that we need to, at an initial stage, at least aspire to cultivating within ourselves, and then certainly to generate it and keep it sustained. And the way to generate this motivation that everything that I do is directed to fulfilling the heartfelt needs of beings. Everything that I do is directed to me cultivating the ability within myself to be of greatest benefit to others, to cultivate this motivation, and then to actualize that result, to actually achieve that result. There are the two methods of the 6 causes and 1 effect, and that of equalizing and exchanging self with others.
냠내 제세도 아니 규죽다 아니 대보대 전주 셈 거라시고래 지나 전주 셈 기해라 당번년에 냠내 제하라 규죽요래서 디 규죽디 냠내 제발라 데는 전주 셈 기래제 다 규죽디가래 람나 아니 셈자는 제랑게 마 제용와 하우 잼바 디고미아디 직제 아니 디제라 셈자는 제랑 랑리 진치부 임바 세디 레스베 고미아디 직제 니제 데네 as simjan jiran tinchimo inza rangi kyang an simjan tamjele pa an pemba dukin sembi kom na kom ya jikje sumjerwa dijela dene simjan tamje diawa da temper show sim jamba kom ya je dijela simjan tamje dunga da trawa show simbi ge ni je kom ya de je tadi nga tro sa so digala dene Simja Tamje Diawa the Demba de Chigi, Simja Tamju Dunga the Tawa the Chigi, Jisa Simja Tamju Dunga, Dunga Gudan Drane, Chigi, Jisa Simja Tamju Kuri Dunga Taj, Yasangi Salang, Guigi is in a Denik Hilling Jadi, and the Chik the Hassan Dasigor. Tadi, Dile Savicella, the Simja Tamje Maltravangi Chigi, Sempiga Samo Dile Savicombe Chela, then the Simja Tamji Sayoko Toba, show the Bejan Simiki, to go resident.
The first of these two methods is the 6 causes and 1 effect. So what is the effect? It's the cultivation of bodhicitta. It's the cultivation of the gateway realization for entering into the paths of bodhisattvas. So that is the effect or the result. And to achieve this, there are 6 primary causes to be cultivated. Those 6, firstly, the recognition that all beings have been our mothers. In other words, to recognize the close and intimate relationship that we have with each and every sentient being without exception. And recognizing this intimate relationship that we have of mother and child with all beings is the first cause. And in dependence on this, we give rise to reflection on the kindness that all beings have shown us. We do this in the way that was we were guided in earlier, starting with those in our immediate close community and expanding that out. Recognizing the kindness that we receive from beings in this life and all lives. Recognizing the benefit that we receive from beings in this and all lives. And in dependence then on the second training comes the third. The natural wish to repay the kindness that we have now recognized others give us. The natural wish to be of benefit to others in return for all the benefit that they continue to show us. And this then is the third cause. And when this independence on this arising within us in a powerful way, we naturally turn to the cultivation of the 4th cause, which is, may all beings may the heartfelt desires of all beings be fulfilled. May all beings experience lasting, stable happiness. And in order for this to come about, the second part, may they achieve or cultivate the causes that lead to lasting happiness. And this is how we develop the 4th cause of love. May all beings experience only lasting, stable happiness. And to do so, cultivate the causes for that. But in order to do so, we need to, then comes the 5th cultivation of the 5th cause. In order to experience lasting happiness, may all beings be freed from suffering. May all beings be freed of the causes of suffering. And here we generate the 5th cause of compassion. In dependence now on the cultivation of each of these causes comes about the 6th, where one sees it as one's own individual responsibility to fulfill this aspiration, that having a mere aspiration is insufficient. Beings require a guide. Beings require someone to help them. And we take this as our responsibility to help beings fulfill this aspiration and fulfill their own aspiration of achieving happiness and its causes and eliminating suffering and its causes. And this is where we cultivate the 6th cause, that of universal responsibility, the altruistic attitude of universal responsibility. And when this arises within us, naturally the result comes, which is where, in order to fulfill our responsibility, to live up to this promise that we have made ourselves, we strive to become a Buddha for the sake of others. We strive to perfect ourselves, become a perfect being, so that we can be the perfect guide for others. And here we generate bodhicitta.
Adine zadang anjuge chanju simje ge tundala dangbo nyamnen je yunde na marshi simje namje range marsh je nyong sa de tin ma sam dang ho la ro jisan di de ya go chön la ani nye la ngan ju kar sam dang ho rasne na dangim sam dang ho re simje namje na dangim gom ho re je.
So those are the 6 causes that are cultivated to give rise to the result of bodhicitta. For those 6 causes, for our training in those 6 causes to bear the desired result, we need to develop a foundation, and that foundational practice is equanimity or impartiality. On the basis of the prior cultivation of impartiality, can we give rise to the 6 causes that lead to the results of bodhicitta.
대다기 응원도 세월다 군제 맹아 뒷나네 당보 마시네 야장고로 다디 로로다 지사 되니기 될야 아니 녀를 가르쳐 버려라나 대다기 응원도 시대 다 군제 맹아 뒷나네 대다기 마시장고로 디녀라서 대다기 응원도 아니 심전 탐제라 심윤백에 당념 공부여시 지사 심전 탐제야 심 직례 예링매바 당념 공부에 끼치 버려서
Now turning to our text, at the second last paragraph on page 32, as a preliminary to all 7 of these meditations, make your mind level by means of meditating on impartiality towards all sentient beings.
Zada simjen tamjela, 내가 저게 따님 공고리에 시디 다 가르치네 공고리에 랍나 아주 심jen tamje 랑이야 가서랑기 마제 용화들로디 약보 깨야야 내가 저 심전 탐제라 따님직 약보 공부도 왜나 안 심전 저랑게 마제 용화들 전투고 말해서 검투고 말해지래 디네자 심전 저랑기 아니 심전 탐제라 따님 공부를 해야지.
The reason why one needs to first cultivate impartiality is because with a partial attitude, which is experienced in that we feel a sense of closeness towards some and distance towards others, with such an attitude, we cannot come to see all beings without exception as having been our mothers. Certainly not on an emotive level. So we need to train in impartiality first, which brings a sense of closeness to all equally. And it's on that basis that we then can come to cultivate the understanding that not only do we, that on independence on the basis of feeling close towards all, we can come to see that they have all been our mothers and shown us kindness and so forth. So therefore, impartiality is an indispensable foundation for the training in the 6 causes.
chosu lungwa yue na sewarda, yiring chosu lungwa yue na, an simchen la marshi ki tsingi, lo tsingi tsangwa di yakwa ki tuku ma resi, ki mi ki esi, ki ma resi.
This is expressed in the next line, near the bottom of page 32. If the mind sees some beings as dear, is hostile towards some, and indifferent towards others, it is not sufficiently mature to be able to meditate upon all beings as having been your mother.
Disa niring simjen tamjela niring mar chosu lungwa sidi, na chosu lungwa la yadu, ane jigla gawa na jigla magawa chayadi chagirwa, disa niring siwrwa, jigla gawa chay semdi chosu lungwa la yadu, ganazu semdi kashele semda nyawara che kashele jig semda ringwa chawa na chosu lungwa chagirwa kaza jigba chego marwa chosu lung se de ane semda nyewi cho de le ka cho jigli ba semda nyewo cha songwa jen cho jila ane semda ringbu cha na de le ane jamba gom tu marwa kasa ne nga zuge karina bene karina nga zuge jig 강아 치 닝제 선배 섬지도 소소 가서 들려 강아 치 나오도 닝제 선배 섬로 지야다는 즉 잠바로도 닝제 기투고로 와. 다 소소 막아서 들려 강아 치네 어디 야구 주소 섬고 디 야구 주소 섬고 콜 인지 셈비게 섬코라 데칼레 가고 체거로 와 지사 셈제 저기 데니게 섬노 코바이나 셈제 탐제레 잠바기 투고 말아 지상한 저기 기투고 말에 마도 바인자 데니게 섬노 초수 송화제는 니링 랍드 소수게 섬노디 셈제 카실이야 잠바디 잠제 타 녀와제 가와제 카실 타 아니 그 마가와르 제베네 셈디 니링 차송으로 와 니링 차송 지사 셈제 나저 섬노디 셈제 탐제 찍바다 투변지 고고로 와 당저 지사 찍le 야가다 찍le 두고 다는 거 섬노디 니링 차리 릉동 차송으로 와 지사 디니 인자 디니 멤버제 셈제 탐제래 니링 야바나 아니 찍le 잠바 찍le 마가와 요바나 아니 아주게 공로다 녀모데 빠투야요 말에 가지 안주 냠는 제데 가서 나주길에 녀모바 빵고 그래 녀모 빠야가 된다 시고로 와 지사 차단 빵고 그래 차단 빠야게 된다라 나주게 냠는 지고로 디 냠는 제발라 찍le 가와 주에나 안델레 차과지야다 찍le 마가와 주에나 델레 시다기야디 하는 가서 빵투고 말에 되는자 셈디파 셈전 삼들 찍바 따비로 주고 그래서 디장고 그래서 그러 봐 야, 예사와 주민의 일로에만 심전의 진리를 초소 말하고 하셔야 됩니다.
Our current position is we do have a sense of partiality towards, we relate to others, certainly on an emotive level, with partiality, which expresses differently. We feel close to some and distant from others. And this is due to this bias, we are unable to generate actual love towards others, a love free from self-interest. And likewise, we cannot develop true compassion towards others. And this is because we regard some with affection, and it's for those we wish them happiness. But others, we are indifferent towards them, and therefore we are largely indifferent towards their happiness and their problems. And similarly, those that we dislike, there our situation is really contrary to where we need to be, in that we often feel some joy when they encounter problems and difficulties. So therefore we have to develop an unbiased attitude, an impartial attitude, seeing all beings as developing a sense of closeness equally towards all beings. Because the situation we find ourselves in right now is that we do have a wish for those that we feel a sense of closeness towards to experience happiness. And we do generate, and certainly will have compassion for their suffering. But for those that we are indifferent towards, if they are experiencing happiness or not, we are indifferent to that. If they are experiencing tremendous suffering, some compassion will arise, but it will be fleeting and it won't lead to action. And those that we dislike, we are not so happy when they experience happiness. No joy arises in our mind when they experience happiness. And if they experience problems, those that we dislike experience problems and difficulties, there some joy arises. This is contrary to a bodhisattva, to the ideal of a bodhisattva, the aspiration that a bodhisattva would hold. So therefore, we have to train in impartiality. And to express this again in a final way, the goal of a Buddhist practitioner is primarily to abandon their afflicted minds completely. And if one is biased, if one still is governed by bias, feeling close to some and distance from others, those to whom we feel a sense of closeness, attachment will arise. Those for whom we feel a dislike towards, anger arises towards them. So a lack of partiality, being governed by bias, this serves as a basis for our afflictions to arise, and it's our afflictions we need to abandon. So the cultivation of impartiality, where one feels a sense of closeness and evenness towards all, serves to help us overcome our afflictions.
Zandelia, Simjen Nam Nyering Mar Chosu Malonga, Simjen Nam Nyering Mar Chosu Malonga. Simjen Tamja Kashe Mache Nyore, Kashe Mache Manore, Sambana, Mache by the Chosulwa Charwa, Chesa Mache Nyon dele Sosolia Gada, that Gemano dele Semdaring Aligua, Chesa Mar Chosu Malach Kugures. Then the Chosul Humboina, Simjan Tamja Rangi. Ma Jenyon and below things on Jitu Mare. Carson Simjan Jerangi Maji, Jeon Mare, Sembe some Tavana, Simjan Jerangi Majinon, Tam Jerangi Jenyon as Majinon as below the Jitu Mare or what. Needing Mar Chos Huma Yena, Simjan Namla, Marshi, Yulo Tin Sami City. Simjan Tam Jerangi Marshi, Jenyon, Sembologi, Yabush Kiku is, Dikevala. And Simjan Hamjarangi Margin, the something but the Simjan Kashing Margin, or the Kashi Mano, Sambazana, and Simjan Hamjarangi Margin, or the Ludikia Yomar, was a Kashi Mano, some Gorba.
These points are important, so we need to take time to hear this again and again, reflecting on this meaning, seeing how it's appropriate and applicable to us. So read again what we've looked at. If the mind sees some beings as dear, is hostile towards some and indifferent towards others, it is not sufficiently mature to be able to meditate upon all beings as having been your mother. So if we are feeling the sense of closeness towards some, independence on this attachment is going to rise. Independence on this feeling of a biased attitude, feeling close to some, hostility towards others will arise when they harm those that we are close to. Because we see the one group as dear and the other group we see as harmful, and we don't value them equally. Not valuing them equally makes it impossible for us to see them as kind as the first group. Rather, our bias pushes them away, especially if they do harm to the group that we value. So therefore, if we have this partial attitude of feeling close towards some, indifferent towards others, and hostile towards the further group, it's impossible to see all beings as having been our mothers.
Dine zadang nga zuge tanyong gom sites simjen la mi che simjen chama la mi che tanyong gom gori tanyong gom gori la yode simjen chama tanyong sui thuye gi nga zu gom che gom ge simjen je tanyong sui thu gori besen sui thuya so mare simjen tamje tanyong me ngone tanyong re besen mare ka she ya ga yore ka she duwa yoro da tan ji pe cha yo marwa da tanyong gom la de gar gom la so samlo ti simjen nam le ba ta du Chikya Tatan Chikpa Samtang Kures, Tisamlo de Kores, Jango Kures, Ranzo Samlo Nalaya, Karioras, Be Nering Shuchimbo Shujurva, Kashele Yaga Samtada, Bene Kashel Dua Samtada, Tiniki Nering Shuchurva, Kashele Kahata, Kasha Mega Jurvada, Chisan Ding Anzu Samlo di Yuri, Chisan Di Samlo di Meva Sokures, Nanzo Samnang, Samlo de Simja Sultavana, Tatan Chipichikan Staj Sokures.
The meditation on impartiality, the first point to make is one doesn't start with all sentient beings as our object, trying to cultivate a sense of impartiality towards all sentient beings. This is not how one starts, and if one does start in this way, one will not achieve an impartial attitude. Rather, the very first starting point is to recognize our biased attitude, come to see it within ourselves, and then see it in play during our daily life, see it arising in our daily life. See both in meditation and our daily life, how we do feel a closeness towards some, an indifference towards many, and a sense of hostility towards others. We have this biased attitude. And see how from this biased attitude, afflictions arise. So the starting point is to recognize where we are.
Dini zangdang anzu samlo delia, semjen tamjelia, datang jigbaru dadi, that jigbaru dadi dasidu, dayang the datang the jigba datang de la mangoyorvada, Kariosan dang anzu comiadi, that the Karaco comiadi, say the comiadi, semjen tham jele deho goba jigba res semjen tham je duha midu ba jigba res samdang go chegurwa jiza denige sem tangnyum jima je bayina je madu bayina an semjen tham je rangi marje nyongwa saidi chengi changwa de lochi kitu mares semjen tham je rangi marje nyongwa res mlo chengi changwa jima je bayina yago ma je bayina semjela ne jamni je de yago kitu mares de le ya disuwa jamni je chunze ge yang chore chen de ge be dene 토말 다녀 공고에서 가브리엘랑 semjale 잠바다 가브리엘 기그리 그 잠바 기거 dine 초그리전 송고레스 소소 가사다 지솔야 잠바기야 용고레 안데 소솔야 마가스들라 한 잠바기야 용고 말와 세다 초그리 잠기그레스
So recognizing then where we are, our own sense of closeness towards some and distance towards others, and recognizing the great fault of this and the danger that it poses to us as being a basis for the arisal of afflictions, will lead to the arisal for the wish to generate an impartial attitude and an attitude of equanimity towards all. So that's the starting point. Then in the actual training of impartiality, we reflect that from the side of sentient beings, we cannot differentiate between them in terms of who desires happiness and who desires freedom from suffering and pain. We cannot identify any who yearn to experience no happiness, who yearn to only experience pain or suffering, or even some pain and suffering. We need to recognize that there's no distinction between there's no distinction between beings on this basic level. Every being has as the deepest heartfelt impulse to experience happiness that's unpunctuated by even a moment of suffering, no matter how slight. And this is a crucial recognition to come, because as our text says, without this, without this impartial attitude, we cannot build on this to see all beings as our mothers. Moreover, as the text then continues, if the mind has no equanimity, any love or compassion generated will be biased and unbalanced. And this is because if we remain biased, our self-interest will remain dominant, and we will continue only to experience love for those that we're close towards, and compassion towards those that we are close towards, and perhaps those we are impartial towards, that we are indifferent towards. But those that we are hostile towards, love and compassion will not arise.
Nini zangaran zuge samlo nanglia kiti na nyering di shuk shimbo shu cha de ye de ro de zangaran zuge ngaran zu rakba ro sam ta be ne ta ngaran zuge so so ranki jehab shanda je sam ta be na ngaran zu sam na la khare ros na ngaran zu jehab di shanda jehab ta ngaran zu jehab ni la ni de ngaran zu jehab di yaga chana ga yor ba da je zang ga yor ni ta ngaran zu jehab de le sem da nyawa je 가와제 되네 야가찬나 가와요 봐다 안디나시 다 야갑 나로베 집이네 나 저기 소소라는 게 당한 저기 미리기 톤에 있네 소소의 미리디 야가주나 안스 가와다 소소 미리디 안지기 제반에 됐음 마가와서 샘다링 예링 차려와 안디나시 마 저기 lumbi nga디로 세베네 소소게 요생 nga디디 아니 야가주나 가와 현당가와 nga디 소수의 요새 nga디디 이야기 줘봐이나 가와 현다 제바이나 소수의 nga디디 이야기로나 같이 와다 안 제모진들시네 소수 nga디 나는 제모 제간디 톱나 가와 되네게 마톱나 네 직도스 마기와로 제가 디디 예링도 우치네 추수래 안 디나네 집에나 추델레 추타니레베네 되네 디나데 소수의 분야다 파마다 분야다 니직디기랴 안에 야보주나 가와 데 마임게 샨달로 주나 안데 지마가 와서 데네게 샘다니 군예링 딜레고라 다 소수게 년 나로 삼다베네 다 소수 년 나래 안에 소수게 직 분야다 파마다 데네게 파미 분야 데네요베네 다 디나데야 소수게 분야다 안에 아무 파말이야 야가 주네 가와다 안에 네 년 샨다디게랴 저 샘다링아 차고로와 어도 세진도 다 소소라랑기 데 분야로 니숨 줘베네 다 디나네라 예링 용고리다 분대 찍을 때 같이 해야지 찍대 감마샤로지 재산 찌리 야가춘다 가시에 대 용으로 재산 파마리네 소소를 파마 바바다 아메니 요벤데 소소라는 게 가시기 바발라 가치에다 아말라 마데스 디지게 셈다리와 가시게 아말레 가치와다 가시를 바발레 되셈다리와 딘도 삼단 디니기 재산 다도 차르토나 소소라는 야게린 치셔데 파마니들에 대 나가 주게 삼나래야 가시라 바발라 가치요래 아니 바바다 아마니지나 바발라 가치에데 바발레 셈다냐와차래 재산 아마들 되셈다리가차래 가시라 아니 아말이야 가체요. 진짜 아말 가체여서 아말이야 셈다냐와다 바발레 야 되스가 셈다리와 차로. 진짜 된 일인 차여 반상 소수기 집에 저게 가위게 당원에 야고 휴진 년바로 제베네 야가 야동이네 야가데다 같이 해질 때 교아데 소수도 셈다리가 될 지기로 진짜 예링도 장아 삼나라 예링도 수여를 재산 하나에 깨진 침보 파만니보 될어야 셈 예링 이거래 되네 디마치 되네기 예링디 예링 디왕 깨어도 소소레 녀서들라 베네 소소기 바발이야 셈다 녀와체 아마들 제네 바발 때 셈다 녀와 요베네 되네 아메기 바발 때 녀거로식 저게 통나미라 제베네 람사 바발로 코로나 체용으로와 아마데 소소 아마디 바발레 셈다슈 셈다 녀보 요반자 아마디기 바발레 때 진리게레지 되네 제베네 디지균 통고 말와 소소 셈다 녀어되지 제가 디니기 차다왕이 송고를 제가 나눠줄래도 삼다면은 예링디베 슉시 못 차대 제가 디 예링 요바 인자 셈제 탐젤이야 아니 잠바디 따다기 투고만 잠바 게마투바디 겐디지 거로wanza
When we look at ourselves with honesty and sincerity, the strength of our biased attitude, the pervasiveness of our biased attitude may well surprise us. So we tend, on a macro level, to feel a strong affinity with our nation state and the people within there. And we experience this when our nation is doing well, especially in comparison to others. So if we're looking in whatever particular league table and we see that our country is doing well, a sense of joy, a sense of pride arises because our group is doing well. And our group is doing well in relation to others. And here we feel a sense of joy at the success of those that we are close to, that they are experiencing, even though others are not experiencing it. And this shows the biased attitude. It's not necessarily that our group is defeating another group, is overcoming another group, but that our group is doing well is sufficient for joy to arise, and that another group is not, we're indifferent towards. This is also clear in terms of our bias towards race or ethnicity, how we respond to suffering of the group that we identify with, or the success of the group that we identify with. So we see a bias here in terms of race and ethnicity too. Also, we may feel this towards our state. If our state is doing well, a sense of joy arises. Our state is doing well. And we hear that another state is struggling, we may laugh about it and say, oh, that's what you expect from them. But even when it's done with joy, we can see that the emotional response is very different when it's not the group that we associate with. And where this is perhaps most easily apparent is in the sporting arena. When our team does well, we're very happy. And this comes at the expense of another team. And on a smaller level, the more intimate level, with our family, when they experience success and joy, happiness naturally arises. When they experience problems and difficulties, compassion, sadness arises within us. And then within a family, this comes down even more, especially if one has a larger family. The group that we are closest to, that we identify with most, in relation to their successes, greater joy arises. And even within that group, our biased attitude expresses ourselves. Let's say we have several siblings, and we're closer to one than to others. That sibling's joys have a greater impact on us. Their sorrows has a greater impact on us. And if there's conflict between our siblings, we are inclined to side with the one we feel closer towards. And likewise with our parents. If we feel closer to one than to the other, and they are arguing, we'll naturally tend to side with the parent we feel closer to. And similarly, in terms of their faults, the one that we are closer to, we tend to overlook their faults. And those that we dislike in particular, that same fault in them, we certainly do not overlook. We exaggerate that fault. So here we can see how from a macro level down to the smallest of levels, to when we're differentiating between just two people amongst those that are closest, we still differentiate between this one over that one. And then when we look at where this is coming from, we tend to see that we exaggerate the importance of actions and words done in this life. That's all. As well as the companion of exaggerating the importance of actions and words not done in this life. And it's due to exaggerating this that we have a liking for the beings who have helped and supported us. We dislike those who have harmed us or harm our group or threaten us or our existence or our groups in any way. And we feel indifferent towards all those who have done nothing particular, pleasant or unpleasant towards us. This is where our impartiality comes from, our bias comes from. And it starts and it's expressed on a macro level right down to varying stages, dividing everyone.
Chile gache da chi dos magada sem chiglia chi gache da chi nyering dos yo di yongor wa de de kashele yongor wa da chasang de nge ba yo ma dina amala de negi soso bu ji bu ina ya bu kashele gache wa da kashele magaro dos sem da ring wa ro chi yongor wa de.
And this is also the case with perhaps the closest of relationships, and that's from a mother towards her children. The sense of bias, of closeness towards some and a distance towards others is also experienced by mothers towards their children. They'll do their best not to show it, but they will feel closer towards some, towards one of their children than their second child. Here too, it's the impartial attitude, the partial attitude.
차상을야 안에 잠바지야다 니지기야다 디 안에 심자 담제랑을 진침보레 세베기 삼로디 약보지 용마도바디 안주일에 내ring 숙침부 여바인자 디기네 용투고 말에 지난 디네인자 심자 담제 안에 제상을 진침바레 세야다 잠바다 니지기 마도바이나 안에 전주심기 투고 말에 제대 디네인자 당아 당보 공안스킬라 당념세의 로디 소수게 로 삼로다나디 당념디 심전 차상의 직발에 선배다다 직부장 다야기 로차야디 계침보레서 원래.
I hope now it's abundantly clear how we experience it, to the degree that we experience our biased attitude and where it comes from. And you need to look at this clearly so it's vivid. Because the great fault of remaining biased in terms of the context we find ourselves in here of striving for Buddhahood is that without feeling equally close towards all, we will not be able to enter into the trainings, we will not be able to experience success in our trainings of the 6 causes. And where this maybe is clearest is in the generation of love and compassion. Because the love and compassion of a bodhisattva is equal for all beings. And if one has a bias towards one group more than towards another, one will not be able to have love for all. One will not be able to have compassion for all. And therefore, the achievement of bodhicitta will be impossible. And if bodhicitta is not achieved, the attainment of Buddhahood is impossible.
Adini zadanga jugi samnunalaya, sosulia, Cetelia, sosugi, Jin Chimbo, Sosu Pamada, Punya, Sosulia, getting Chimbo, and the Gility, Yapura, Sempe, some Dachi, that's Cetelia, Anzulia, Bejic, Ganga, Sosulia, Never Shu, getting the Yapura, Sempe, some Dante, no Juju, Sempe, some Yosigu, Danzi. That's Sosulia, Yapuchi, and the Yamuneci, Yapura, some Chigordi, Nalia, Nimikidi, Nangalia, never care, Nangalia, Yapura, Bashi chicken, Nalia, Ganga, Midikilling, Yapura, some of the when you see the two windows, Yapuchi, Margedi, Nangalia, Ganga Chigor, then Ganga chicken, the new Yapura, some day, then when you see the Tumba Chagi Mundu, Jezadi, Taharim in the Sambege, did not rest a beyond Sivarvada, some Corsigua.
I imagine when one hears about the training in impartiality, generally most people will accept this towards those who have shown them great kindness in this life, such as their parents, that yes, I can see the fault of being biased and favoring one parent over the other, for example. But I think where people may well struggle more with this is towards the group that have caused them harm in this life, who have obstructed our own achievement of success in our life. For example, perhaps work colleagues who are very competitive, who maybe steal your ideas, or people who criticize you all the time or talk behind your back, those whose behavior causes harm to us in this life. So here I imagine it's much more difficult to see that we also need to develop the same sense of closeness towards them as towards the others who have shown us tremendous kindness in this life.
Yapure sempre samno gomna gaze ganis ki tugure guni da kago shuro wa sempre da ngazo samdana gedina susolo neba jiwa gangan jigore gangan jeben tele ane jige ni ngazo yabu jihandi da koni jigbare da thante de guni yongmasi bares ji ngazo samno ya di khorsa ro yongmasi bares.
I can imagine that it's seen as quite achievable that those who on occasion or maybe quite regularly or generally treat us with respect, who show us kindness and care, that we can develop an impartial attitude towards them, even if we don't maybe meet them so often now, but we recall from the past, and we can develop an impartial attitude towards them, but one may have great misgivings about the possibility of feeling a sense of closeness towards those who have shown us grave disrespect, who have impeded perhaps our career success, those who have shattered our dreams, who have broken our hearts, those who speak to us in an abusive manner and take advantage of us, especially if they're still doing it now. How on earth can we develop a sense of closeness towards them?
That thing on the some downtown rally go, some downtown delia, Cedelia, social pember to a pentoya, which against Cedela, socialia, Kagaya, never can get to Minidilla, Chibare, and some of the around the young two Maria said, around to get some of the Gyatso Madaja, some who know Tangorva, bene cedelia sosulia jigi yapo chendele so cedelia sosu yapo chebadi yane yando tenjen ode kola semda yebo chakoro dan cedelia nganzule kanga janya te tingin dil mitene shanda samtang ma ko kanga ki tegi kanga te than dimchen digi digi kanga samtang de kola semda yebo chatu go mare dini jibu samtang bagi koniga la ta kasore tanyum tatuyadi chatu mareda 다 가르고 그래서는 제가 당연 저기 ben에 소설에 강한적인 미디리아 강한적 빼 강한적인 미디리아 파지 삼다베네 그런 알이야 강한적이 미디기 달아야 아는 지게 가르진 지고래 선비간도 삼다 지어 받아 심주를 지어도 직전에 나 저기 야 코론이야 안지게 그런 게 예, 분야다 좀 직도스 마디고 견제네. 안가야 거의 막아서 용식으로. 조진에 그런 나를 막아제데 그런 게 셈나야 빈 녀몽배 왕게 지고래. 진짜 셈 녀몽바 끼데. 진짜 나를 막아요 녀몽바 끼고래. 진짜 나를 당심기 콘주게 당심이 끼고래. 당심디 끼진 디 왕기 아는 미디기 나를 막아래. 좀 유된 거래. 제가 미코론을 때는 카요 말고 녀모배 상황도 송아래샤 선배 삼다베네 미딜리아 아주 닝제 선배 삼리그로와 베네 닝제 선배 삼리그마도 미딜리아 빼 독자르샤 선배 삼리그 말와 제가 두 김제 삼다에도 미디 알에 당심 막아제도 거기를 당심 끼려요 당위에서 알이야 당위에서 선배 콘도에서 선배 끼려요 제가 선배 디게와서 선배 디게 라와 메어 말 미딜라 라와요 말레스 매와자 미디가 알이야 안남줄 마가와다 된데디 차바레셔 제가 미콜이야 라와스요 말에 삼다베네 미딜이야 저기 당위 삼바디 기 말에 맞게바자 데니게 삼다나 지체고래 아니 찍네네 응가 삼다요서 다 미디 체들이야 되네 제베네 직 겨왕아마 디와 고 알이야 판도야고 주요로 와서 제요로 와서 네 마제ኞ요 유래 제상이 마제ኞ요나 알이야 체디기 마디 알이야 제와 제바나지 냐마 제ኞ요로 와 진짜 다데 체들이야 되네 제베네 냐마 알이야 제와 제ኞ요 진짜 데니기 누가 삼다고 민두아 셈베게 데니기 김제는 망고 삼다와 있나 데니고 다디기 체들레 소술이야 팬버트권데다 체들레 니들레 당님 기투야기 로 당님 기투야기 용고로 와다 당심선은 막아와로 와 막아와도 셈 당선은 셰당 라기도 와 셰당 라기도 콩도 셰당 라기도 와다 대차 셰당 라도 파서 막아와도 시고로 와 막였습니다.
This partial bias attitude that afflicts us so causes us to divide beings into groups, into classes. Really what it comes down to is those who we perceive as being of benefit to us and or of benefit to the group that we value them. Those that we perceive as harming us, or harming the group that we value, we develop a sense of hostility towards them. And those that we perceive as having no impact on us or on the group that we value, we are indifferent towards them. We don't really care about them at all. This is why we divide beings in the way we do. And the key component here is this is our way of thinking. We perceive in relation to all three divisions. This is our way of thinking, how we perceive them. So this means we can change this. We have control. We are not helpless. We can transform our way of thinking. We can transform our way of thinking. So we need here to think for ourselves, to use our wisdom, our intellect, We start, and we do so by using reasoning from many perspectives. So one is, we are not taking into account the mental state of those, for example, who harm us. It's because we're not thinking about where they are coming from that we find their behavior or their words as inexcusable. Express it in a different way. We are not putting ourselves in their shoes. So those who harm us or harm our group, they are doing so not primarily because they want to cause us harm, even if they are doing that explicitly. They are doing so because their mind is afflicted. They want happiness just like us. But because their mind is overwhelmed by the afflictions, they are behaving in this way. They are speaking to us in this way, or they are harming us. They are not acting with any freedom. Their afflictions have dominated them. They have lost control of their own minds. They're thinking that by acting or speaking in this way, they are creating the causes for happiness, but they are suffering now and they will suffer in the future. Understanding this leads to compassion arising within us. Compassion arising within us means we no longer see them as amongst a group that we dislike. We're feeling a sense of closeness, affinity towards them, wanting them to be freed of pain. So this is one key way to develop equanimity, is to recognize that those who are causing us harm are doing so with no freedom. They have lost control to their own afflictions, and thereby we generate compassion for them, and we start to feel close towards them. The second key way is to be aware that every relationship we have with beings is impermanent. We've observed the fluidity of our relationships in this life. How beings go from stranger to close friend. How close friends go to strangers. How close friends go to enemies. And occasionally even enemies become dear friends. We have seen this in this life. And therefore we can easily extrapolate to past lives. Likewise, we come to understand that because these relationships are so fluid in this life, we can be certain that those who are causing us harm in this life, or have done so in past lives, did not. They did show us kindness in the past. And that kindness almost certainly would have overwhelmed in comparison to the minor harm or inconvenience that has been caused in this life, no matter what it is. Thinking in this way too serves to shake up our grasping that this being exists only in this way. And we come to see that there's a far more fluid relationships between beings. And there's no basis at all for bias. None whatsoever. So this is the second way. We can add to this as well the third reasoning that was mentioned earlier, that all beings want happiness and to be freed of suffering. And for this point too, there is no basis to differentiate.
Dene tomar tanyong gom kwe serwa da jizan tangbo da dene ki ma shenye le gomba la tangbo tomar tangbo tanyong gom kores da di tsu yangs che dir penye ganya ma jebe barme simjen duma la mines ane gom kores gom kore chere jizan da tanyong gom yo du tanyong gom se gi simjen de la yang da che di ge rang la ya nyen da ane jige 당보네 공묘도 공도 냠는 지도 갑라 소수기 녀다 녀 많이 발라 삼당 공바이나 당임께 디베 깔레 카와레스 공미알리 깔레 카보요레스 데네자 안다 카르 당보 가네 삼 셈젠 가네 질미 고레랍나 당용 검색에 셈젠데 가네 스코레스나 Then Sosolia, Cetelia, Soso Panda, Pandobata, Neva, Gaya, Medu Kengi, and Gima Barmegasm Chichilla Miche and Danium Samta, Della Miche, Danium Samtam or Egere.
Now turning to the text, and the bottom of page 32. Therefore, first practice equanimity or impartiality meditation. So hopefully, why it is so crucial that we develop this foundation of impartiality is now abundantly clear. And turning over the page comes a presentation on the meditation. Begin this by visualizing various neutral people, those who have neither harmed one nor helped you in this life. So here, the neutral people refers to those who haven't either harmed or helped ourselves or the group that we value, the group that we identify with. This is where we're encouraged to start, because we don't feel a natural sense of attachment towards them, which we do with the group that we feel a closeness with, or a feeling of dislike, which we feel for those that we feel distant towards, especially adverse towards.
Ranglia, Pembaya Marup, Neva Maki Setelia, Panya Gaya Medigan, Barme Simjalade, Della Simbarme Simjala, Mia Yungore, and Azumi Milis, Miji Sunajigore, Dimembigi, Dundor Sunajigoroa, depending on the Mil Samtavena, Setelia, Sosolia, Panya Gaya Medigan, Beneda, Semjan, Demi, Tanga to get tiny meeting Semjan, that Bened Shanda Mira, some Danshura, Benanga to get. Karsoreda Bene Semje Samda Venedelia and Bene Kangurus Mason Kuchi Yovena, then Dison and Zedelia, Peneda Kaimeche, Javaskami, Cherameti, Chagorwa, the Nazi Kinguru Kuchi Yovena, those Telemiche, and this Kuchi Mena, Nikashele Yagachi or the Kashele Yaga, some Nakashidua, some Diagi, some of the Matam, nearing Mevache, nearing the Kaja called Tanyong Gum Kures. Tanyong Gum Gode Garisine, Della Yang Azuki, Sedele Panu Had, Yomarte, Manzukingo Kuchi Tova, and some Jimp and Kingoranga, Shovene, Tilpata, and Manzu Dinana Dus, Dambo Hondu, the Kangaroo Kuchi Dus, Mangus do some grua. Then Mad Ships Hose, Stanley Unumudu, and Anzole Chile Yara, some Leon, Chile Gacha, Dilmagas, Yungurua, Chizadi Yungu Barme, Simchele Net. Chile Kawa, Chile Makawa, Yungore. Then some Dinichi Chile Kawa, Chile Makawa Leadu, San Dinile, Chile Kawa, Chewada, Chile Makawa, Chedu, Gimzen, Kari, or Sangal Gimzen Mindus, they do Chinang and some Tango Children.
We start then with a neutral group, those who we consider as having neither harmed nor helped us, or the group that we value in this life. And here we can refer to humans who we consider to have, we don't perceive as having shown us kindness in this life, or even having done anything that indirectly benefits us. But perhaps even easier than humans is to start with animals. If we take, for example, a mob of kangaroos that one sees outside. So if we observe a mob of kangaroos, it's easy to say, well, what have they done for us in this life? And if we were asked by our companion to point out which of these kangaroos has shown us the most kindness in this life, we will laugh at them. Or if we're asked to point out which of these kangaroos has done something has done the most that has indirectly benefited us in this life, we'll find such a question equally ludicrous. However, should we spend quite a bit of time in the paddock and observing this mob of kangaroos? Almost certainly, the strong habituation we have to bias will serve that amongst a group of, say, 5 kangaroos, we'll find some reason to like one more than the others. Possibly we'll name them and we'll say, I like that one more because of how it looks or how it acts. What a bizarre basis for discriminating between beings.
나 대소야 데니기 심제 대솔미 장아서 단요 고명도 제가 다 콘솔이야 나 찌리 야가 가제다 찌는 마고치 김생 가빈도 가르rel람나 아니 대소 코로나 중원에 삼다 코로나 차사 대화 되바다 동안 믿어봐 지바레스 콘 차사 찌래 대화 되고 차사 대화 고바 지바레 동안 먹고 지바레 와스 제가 대화 되바다 동안 믿어 지바서 코로나 줄에 니린스 가민도 대화 되바레 지바레 동안 믿어봐 지바레스 제가 콘솔레 대화 고고레 대화 고바 지바레 동안 고바 지바 먹고 지바레 세상이 찌래 가와 제바네 전부 제바네 콘 차사 디 전부도 고고레스 찌래 너비기에디 강아테디 디 고고 말와스 세상 콘솔 대화 되바도 믿어봐 동안 믿어봐 지바레 세상 콘솔 뭐네 콘솔레 니린 지고 김생 가민도 와스 뭐라 베네 디다이 데도와 칙텔라 디다기 뭐네 대화 동안 믿어봐 총신스 제가 대다가 뭐네 대화 동안 믿어봐 총신스 대질려선데 동생 제가 코로나 중에 뭐네 삼다베네 제가 콘 제가 대화 되봐 지바레 동안 믿어봐 지바르샤스 제가 되네 인자 대화 되봐 동안 믿어 지바레 제가 되네 인자 콘솔리아 니리 쳐고 김생 가미도 와스 차상 가시 대화 가시 동안 되봐 있나 아니 동안 되긴 될래야 전부 쳐배는 대한 지금 누구로 네 디제네 지고 말봐 제가 되네자 대화 되봐 지바레 동안 믿어봐 지바 제가 콘솔로 거부 제네 대화에 어디 구구로 차상 지바레도 와스 제가 콘솔 외에 코로나 외에 삼다노 콘솔이야 아니 니린 지역고 김생 지를 가와 지어데 지 마가 지어 김생 가야 민도스 가서네 동안 믿어봐 지바레 와스 동안 믿어봐 지바한상 아니 가실레 동안 믿어봐 지바 가실레 동안 제바 있나 근데 믿어봐 지바자 니린 차르고 와스 제가 거가 그거 말아 제가 동안 믿어봐 지바레 동안 믿어봐 지바레스 코로나 중간에 삼다다 제가 콜이야 코로나 중간에 삼다는 아주 나 콜이야 콘주 샘쟁 강 콘주리아 지리냐 야 제와의 지리 동안 누가 제와에 가미 누우선 배 삼다디로
From that illustration then, in our meditation on impartiality, we can see that there is no valid reason to be biased. There's no valid reason to value one being more than the other. And here we're reflecting on the different ways to look at impartiality. We're looking at the very first one here, that there is, there is no difference from the point of view or the fundamental basis of all beings, that all beings want happiness and should be freed of suffering. From this perspective, there is no way to differentiate between beings. We cannot look at a mob of kangaroos and say, you I feel closer to than the other one, because that feeling closer to one implies, from my side, a greater joy arises when you achieve your heartfelt happiness. There's no valid basis to distinguish between beings like this. No valid basis at all. So here we're using our logic and reason to see how illogical it is to be biased towards beings. Because on the fundamental level, no matter how they have treated us in this life, on a fundamental level, there is no difference between beings. And this is expressed explicitly in our text with the next sentence. From their side, each of them wants only happiness and does not want any suffering.
제가 심제 갱구로 디수기다 디니게 소소리아 디잉알에 뇌바레 디잉알에 판도바레세네 된 디잉알에 판도아제 지잉알에 뇌바이네 네 판도안데레 가체다 근데 판마도안데레 지마가 치고야디 김제를 떼서 되게 자교로와 이내 체델이야 디수경알이야 지기 팬바다 지기 뇌바스카야마 지기가는 제가 메디게 지바레 와서 제가 지기 뇌바요 말 지기 판도와요 말 제상 콘솔리아 지기 예린 지역화의 김생가에 미도와서 그래서 건주용에 중간에 찍녀바 제바다 찍이 녀바지 찍이 펜바도바나 김생 됐어요 펜바도간들 야가 삼다 녀비기엔들 됐두가 삼다 차기도데 되네 가요 말았어 세델이야 고용할이야 펜녀여바 찍바리 차상 펜바 제메 녀바메바 찍부지기 하래서 제가 되네 인상아 찍을 가와져야 돼 찍을 마바지 김생 가이면도 와서 베게 누 삼다 지로 차기도
So with our mob of kangaroos, from the perspective of this life, we cannot point to one and say, that one has harmed me in this life. Amongst all of them, it is that one that has harmed me the most. Similarly, with the mob of kangaroos, we cannot point to them and say, in this life, that kangaroo has been of greatest benefit to me. Cannot do that. If they had done so, then we could say, yes, there is at least a weak basis for our bias. But as none of them have had any impact on us in this life, there is no basis to have any bias or differentiation or distinction towards them.
다 갱고로 크론즈 응원에 삼다베나 소설 김생 소설이 예링이 제거하기 지레가 제다 지때 됐습니까 제기 김생 가야 민도 김생 민도 지바래샤스 제산다 이내 당하는줄이야 지레 베네 갱고로 나는에 부 충화친 델이야 됐까 제다 갱고로 진 됐을래 디제 충화진 됐까 매체 예링 됐 용고로 와 진짜 니네 영화데 가르치는 연구를 해가래 지가 하용 지도 마가용데 가르치 레버레선 소소 삼다데 뭐 춘춘데 인조르지 됐수부 지가 야가르지 디 콜가체게 딩아 콜에 착비 원게 가체데 차네 가와 가체게다 데네 베니기 밀레 낭낭토네 안지게 이두 묘화데 나에 챤데 됐까 마체 지자디 차단게 원게 소아쟁알이야 콘슬리앙이 됐까 셰다 지가 마체 마가용아디 예링 됐어야디 소소 차단게 원게 소소게 노트기 돈에 리에지 자기도 와서 비게
So we come to see in this way that from the perspective of each being, or each individual kangaroo in this mob, there's no valid way to differentiate between them in towards of some being dearer than others. Because from their perspective, they are all the same from desire, in the terms of desiring happiness and longing to be freed of pain and misery. However, though, for us sitting now on the side of the paddock, having observed them for a while, almost certainly we would have felt bias arise. Perhaps we like a joey more than an adult, feeling that, oh, the joey is very cute, look how it jumps around, and we feel an attachment for the joey, but not for some of the adults. And why is that? Independent on the small body, we've given rise to attachment. We've given rise to bias, valuing this one more than the other. And seeing this, we come to see that there is no logical basis. It is clearly illogical to value this being more than that being, because we find their body cuter.
나디네 딜리암 데네 나오서 랑구 모이네스 랑구 모이네 디남 랑기 파만제비기 니 샤다 임베 레가 녀월 손에 판도제 레가 아니 링월 손에 녀버기비 차니 미제와 디탐젤라심 다뇽 공고를 예사제 그래서 나가서나 가린 거스네 다도 삼지로 하듯이 세델이야 아니 디수게 답변을 심장 근거가 여바 딩하게 가려야 세델이야 팬바다 판녀 가야 마지바 찍바레스 네 거기서 대화되바 도면 찍바레스 이내 개왕아마 삼담에 개왕아마 찍이가려야 판도야 고치 유래 진짜 뒤에 잡고 개왕아마 가려야 판도 지엔들이야 셈다니에다 개왕아마 가려야 판도 마지엔들라 하는 게 셈다리와 제나 되니기 정화 용수로 와서 배삼용구로 와 되네 삼다베나 지산 개왕아마가 삼다베네 개왕아마 차상 디기가래 판도 제발이 디기 판도 마제바세 예와 치투에 대가래 요 말했어 그래서 차상 개왕아마 삼다만 개왕아마 지기가를 판도치기를 지기가를 뇌바유 제시기레스 제시기레스 이나 개왕아마 뇌바 제겐디기 니 개왕아마들이야 판도치기레스 그래서 개왕아마 알레 판도제겐디기 니 개왕아마들 뇌바 제기레스 그래서 되니가 지바를 같이마도 그래서 니가 게가래 뇌바 제용와 지바 판도용와 지바 인자 아니 수디 야가래라 제산 코인이 야도 따야 가면도 니린치야 가면도 그래서 니가 게 판도 제바 같이마도 니가 게 판도 제 지바래 같이마도 니가 게 뇌바 제 지바래셔 그래서 디니 이제 뇌바 기용요 판도 제용요 니가 제용요 그래서 지디게 판도 제용요래 지디게 롱아망 알레 뇌바 제 르딩아마들라 그래서 개왕아마들라 뇌바제 디 개왕아마들이 간도 판도 제요래 지디기 개왕아마들이야 판도 제 디 개왕아마들라 야제 뇌바기요래 진짜 되는 인자 권일이야 삼다원 뇌바지 알이야 뇌바지 지버지 판도 제 지버지 지버래도 와서 디 거기 야가래 디 야가 두가래서는 권일은 예능치야 가면도 와서 삼다야대로
So thus far in the meditation, we've seen that from the perspective of each of these individual beings, one cannot differentiate from their perspective between them because they all share the same foundational desire for lasting, stable happiness, freed of pain and misery. So there's no basis for bias there. Secondly, from the perspective of what they have done for us in this life, there is no basis for bias either, because they've done nothing for us in this life. And thirdly, what about the relationships we've shared with them in past lives? Because maybe not as a mob of kangaroos, but certainly as individual beings, we have had relationships and interactions in past lives. Where whatever life form we were in and they were in at that time, we would have had interactions in past lives. And here we see that in past lives, because of the infinite number of past lives and various life forms, we would have interacted. And we would have interacted in a variety of life forms and in a variety of relationships and in a variety of ways. And because of that, each of these individual beings would have been of benefit, would have been of benefit to us explicitly in a past life, would have indirectly been of benefit to us in past lives, would have directly shown us great kindness in a past life. Similarly, they would have also harmed us in past lives. So we can say about all of these, all of the kangaroos within this mob, in our interactions in our past lives, it wouldn't have been like now, where they are just an object of sight for a few moments. We would have had whatever relationship we did, and each of them at some point would have caused us some harm, perhaps even grave harm. But also, whether in that same life or a life previous to that, they would have shown us tremendous kindness. They would have shown us some benefit. They would have maybe benefited us indirectly. So all that mix of relationships has existed in the past, with all of them individually. And therefore, here again, there is no grounds for bias. Any sense of partiality we feel has no valid basis.
안두 진행하는 저기다 당념 공부해야 돼. 당념 시스템제 담 되니게다 당념 삼다야래. 지난 되니게 랑기 발미게 심전 단능아도 당보 발미게 심전 되니게 심전 가시 경고를 마소나 그 니숨시 질이야 도스전에 삼다지 김전 삼다 하는 코로나 중간에 도스전에 대화되바 지바래 동아미되바 지바래 세대랑알이야 판념에되바 지바래 개왕아마 삼다바데 개왕아마 뇌바에 지겨 판뇌지 판바지 지바래 샤스미 도전에 삼다 곰제 아니 콘솔이야 셈디 당념으로 실려야 돼. 아니 되네게 건조기다 심지엔 비는 당봉을 소야 돼 심지엔 뭔가 지게 조수게 저 매되게 심지엔 갱구르지 날이야 두 진님이 땅요 고매도 진 땅이 섬다도 윤세 섬다 건질래도 땅님 제거해 비 윤세디 두 섬다도 제바지 섬다에도 간섬질이야 어다 건질려다 땅님이 섬데 질레용으로 딜레용도 내네 디멤비게다 갱구르 멤비게 심지엔 안에 지게 사갈 내리간다 라나 저메 되긴 편여가야면데 발매 심지 망보여래 안에 지게 심지 냐다 dunroda denege mangboare and dinashin da nga zu ngo ma shin ba and jige barme se mi da la da denege mangboare da ngo ma shin bi ge da ngo so su ge sedelia phenye jewa ka me digen denege simji barma da dunro yore mi yore la yore nyawa ba yore ida den cham mangbo di chasan je chesa de jinye ma na je samda na gyumchen da gyumchen jigbares gyumchen dires dene za da barme simjen cha salya 지금 예린 제과디 예린 제과 민도 선비게다 나님 고미야디 두슬리고 공고래서로.
As we've seen here in the text, we start on the cultivation of impartiality with the class or the grouping of beings with whom we have a neutral relationship with, such as this mob of kangaroos before us. And we come to see firstly that from their perspective, there is no basis for bias. They all are equal in their desire for happiness and to be freed of suffering. And they're all equally worthy of having that achieved or achieving that. Secondly, we reflect that in terms of what they have done for us in this life, there is no valid basis for differentiation. And thirdly, in terms of our relationships that we've had with them individually over countless past lives, there is no valid way to differentiate between them because at differing points, they've all shown us tremendous kindness. They've all been of benefit to us directly and indirectly. And they've all at times caused us harm. So there is no valid basis here that in this third way either to differentiate between them. Then we take this reflection and we expand it out to other animals, whether it's the fish in the oceans or the birds in the sky, to other animals that we don't have a relationship with. And then we think of human beings. Thereafter, we think of human beings that we are unacquainted with, that we have no particular relationship with in this life. And with this group too, we reflect in exactly the same ways. Now, from their side, we cannot differentiate between them in terms of wanting happiness and wanting to be freed of suffering. In terms of their interactions with us in this life, there's no way to differentiate. And in terms of past life relationships, there's no valid basis for differentiation. And then, moving on from humans, we reflect across the beings in the unseen realms, or the unseen beings in other realms, such as the hells and the spirits and the gods. That in these same three ways, there's no valid basis for bias towards any being. We'll conclude here for this week, where we've again looked at impartiality. And I encourage you now to engage in this meditation, engage in it with the beings that we have a neutral relationship with, and seeing that there is no valid basis for differentiation between them. Next week we'll continue with this important meditation on impartiality, coming to the next two classes of beings, those that we currently feel close towards and distant towards. But between now and then, please do, it's my hope that you do this meditation on impartiality in relation to the beings that we have a neutral relationship with. Then one student has sent in an email question from who he must watch then on the Atisha Center website, where there's a question asking facility. So the question is, in session 69, it's asserted that due to the innumerable life forms and times of the realms, that it is conceivable that every sentient being has been my mother at least once. And that is because we cannot say with any certainty that they have not been my mother. And then the question, I would have thought that both positions are equally certain or uncertain or not known.
Nadi jigwa chagyo mare da karre lamna simjen thamje rangi maji nyore sedi gyumsen samdane je nyore sedi gyumsen samdan gorwa gyumsen gar samdan goresene nga jewang amale jewa beni jewa dil lembare dil malen bare sen cheyo mar beni nga jugi nga dundrol masa nyale jewa len yo mare seda dundrol andi jewa len yo masa jewa Malin Bare said she to a lady. Mebaza, Manzulia, Jawangama, that Nyale, Jawale, Dundroji, Simji, Tida, Tidol, Milli Jawa, Zamling Gazakale Jawal, Dineza, the Simjan Tamje, Rangi Machi, Yore, sometime, Gumze, Gumzen sometime, as then I bet Nyaliki in your Chesa Nyaliki, the Digi, and the dating Casore, Amachi, Yores, be Gumzen sometime, Gumze. Simjen ding e maje manyo wari said sometimes the Gumses Gayo Marwada. Simjen kong e maje yon manyo be Gumseros, Karasamta yore, and then I di Gumsen Samta Yomar. Mevanzang, then I was Simjen Rangi Maje, yon race sometimes Gumsen Samta using it. Simjen Rangi Maje, Manyo wari said, quote Rangi Maje, Manyo, Mares be somebody, Manyo be Gumse. Carriores and the Gumsen some diomanda. Mevanza, Tanga to Gumsen did it, Denesia, Semjan Rangi Mache, Gumsen Santa Yovache, Semjan D. Semjan Mache, Manore said, Gumsen Santa Mevanza Kuni Jibaro Chago Mare.
As I understand the question, then, it is that if we cannot point to a single sentient being and say with any certainty that this being has not been my mother in a past life, then for that same reason, surely there's no sentient being we can point to and say this being has not been my mother or has been my mother in past lives. So that we can say either is possible that they certainly have all been my mothers, or that a being then perhaps hasn't been. Well, there's logical reasoning for the first assertion, but not for the second. There is no logical reason that asserts that a particular being has not been one's mother, other than just to say, well, maybe it's a possibility. The problem is that is overwhelmed by the reasoning that is applied that each and every being would have been our mother at least once, if not most likely many times. And that reasoning is that when we just reflect on the innumerable lifespans, unimaginable life forms over an inconceivable span of time, we get a feel for this web of interconnectedness between beings, this dependency, this connectivity between beings that cannot leave out even one. So there is no scope to say, I can't say with certainty that this being has been my mother. There is no scope for that when thinking about innumerable lifespans, unimaginable life forms over an inconceivable span of time.
Jisa simjen thamje rangi ma je nywa de gyumje mangpo samta yo ban za gyumje yo ban za da je nywa res gyumje yo bare. Da nga jugi da nyamlen che yo de simjen thamje da rangi ma je nywa de gyumje samta yo ban za gyumje di thone simjen je rangi ma je nywa re simbe gomba yina rang ya 아니 진천보 임바리에 심베 심진 되게 진천보 임베 삼로디 기투야리아 판도 연구하래 대단 판도 연구하래 진짜 디네자 저기 심전의 저랑게 맞지 용화디 장고비기 김사로지 나중 냠는 죄도 잠니지 계약이 된다라 심제 탐지랑을 진천보 임바 제 심베 삼로디 야고기야라 디네 심전의 저랑게 맞지 용화래 심베 삼로지 따와이나 디네 저기 디케야라 심전지랑을 진천보래 심베게 삼로디 계야레레라 용거와 심전제 맞지 네 맞지 용요 말에 심베 삼다와이나 디 맞지 마뇨비기 김세 가야서 말 마뇨비 김세 삼다야 가요 말 김세 삼다에 메도 김세나 메나 그 덴바 차고 말아 덴바 차고 말아 아주 지게 가리네 김세 삼다 김세데다 덴바 있나 거 응외니스 김세데 메나 응외니스 다다 차고 말아 세상 심제랑에 맞지 마뇨와리 세디 김세 삼다야 가요 말 매번자 안디야 지게 지네 안 심제는 저랑에 맞지 마뇨와리 심베 삼디 다바 있나 아니 맞지 마뇨와리 삼도 대응할래 진침보 그린침보를 심베 삼로딜레야 가래 하고 바시지고 그래 세상 안주기 냠는 제야라 아니 심제는 저랑에 진침보를 삼다 가서 맞지 용와리 삼다면 진침보 임바디 삼로딜레야 계야래 레라요 그래 심제는 저랑에 네 맞지 마뇨와리 심베 삼다면 많이 김세제요 말에 김세 매나야 제 마뇨와리 삼다면 진침보를 심비게 진 첨보자에게 삼로디기야를 바시지고 그래. 네 바시 제바이나 심제나 잠바기야를 바시 잠제기야를 바시고 그래.
So, thank you for the question because it's important to question, to reason, to think for ourselves. This is imperative because if we just accept what is presented to us, our way of thinking will not be transformed. Our misconception about reality will not be transformed. So reasoning and thinking for ourselves is crucial. Merely accepting will not lead to an inner transformation. So I thank you for the question. And this first point, this first of the 6 causes is crucial. All of them are crucial because the one builds on the others. So one needs to reflect on how all beings have been our mothers, not just merely accepting it. That's a bit too easy. And the fault of merely accepting it is it's merely accepting that all beings have been our mothers and not using the reasoning of innumerable lifespans, unimaginable life forms, an inconceivable span of time, is that it becomes an obstacle to the real generation of the recognition of the kindness that all beings without exception have shown us, the explicit direct kindness, in addition to the vast amount of indirect benefit that they are to us in lifetime after lifetime. So not reflecting well on this close, intimate series of relationships we have with others serves as a serious impediment to the generation of the recognition of the second of the 6 causes of their kindness. And here, if we have an obstacle, it becomes very difficult to develop love and compassion, and thereby bodhicitta and Buddhahood itself those paths are close to us. So therefore it's imperative on all points of the Dharma, not just to readily accept what makes sense to oneself, but to think for oneself and investigate. Thank you very much.